Before Hollywood's strict production code locked cinema in a moral straitjacket, there was an era of unfiltered daring, the pre-code years. These were films so scandalous they didn't just shock audiences, they made entire communities boycott theaters. Today, we're counting down 14 pre-code films so bold, they sparked studio boycotts. Stories so dangerous, Hollywood tried to bury them. 1. Scarface, 1932. If there's one movie that redefined what too far meant for the early 1930s, it was Scarface. Howard Hawks and producer Howard Hughes weren't aiming for a standard gangster flick, they wanted the gangster film. Loosely inspired by Al Capone, the story of Tony Camonte was a raw, unapologetic portrait of power, corruption, and violence. From the first deafening gunshot to its grim finale, Scarface refused to compromise. The Hayes office demanded over 24 cuts, claiming it glamorized lawlessness and painted criminals as folk heroes. Hughes fought back, delaying the release and publicly mocking censors in newspaper ads. Some cities, including Chicago and New York, threatened outright bans. Civic groups picketed theaters, fearing it would inspire real-life violence. The backlash was intense, rival studios distanced themselves, church leaders condemned it, and political pressure mounted. But audiences couldn't resist the forbidden fruit. The blood-soaked finale, violent montages, and hinted incestuous undertones made it one of the most talked-about films of the decade. In many places, underground screenings flourished, with people whispering about scenes too shocking for public view. Ultimately, Scarface was both a triumph and a turning point. It became a rallying cry for stricter censorship, yet it also proved that controversy could fuel box office success. Today, it stands as a defiant reminder of what happens when filmmakers dare the world to watch and win. 2. Red-Headed Woman, 1932. In the Great Depression's moral climate, MGM's Red-Headed Woman was practically a dare. Jean Harlow's Lil Andrews wasn't just ambitious, she was unapologetically scandalous. A secretary who seduces her way up the social ladder, breaking marriages and reputations in the process, she became a lightning rod for outrage. Local censorship boards demanded severe edits, but even after toning it down, the backlash was fierce. Churches branded it immoral filth and a corrupting influence on America's daughters. Entire cities, from Boston to Pittsburgh, refused to screen it. Harlow's gum-snapping, martini-drinking persona was a direct challenge to conventional femininity, and the fact that her character faced no real punishment infuriated moral guardians. The Catholic Legion of Decency listed it among their worst offenders, while women's clubs publicly urged members to boycott MGM entirely. Yet women across the country flocked to see it, some to condemn, others to quietly admire Lil's bold defiance. Red-Headed Woman didn't just cross the moral line. It erased it, grinned, and asked what all the fuss was about. Its box office success proved audiences were hungry for female characters who broke every rule, and Jean Harlow cemented her status as a Hollywood icon of rebellion. 3. The Sign of the Cross, 1932. Cecil B. DeMille was never one to shy away from spectacle, and The Sign of the Cross was his most audacious gamble. Set in ancient Rome, it promised gladiators, forbidden romance, and burning cities. But it was the decadence that drew fire. Scenes of Roman orgies, Christians thrown to lions, and Claudette Colbert bathing in milk pushed audiences, and censors, to their limits. The Catholic Church's National Legion of Decency called for a nationwide boycott. Bishops demanded it be pulled, and some theaters refused to show it entirely unless the risque sequences were cut. Instead of retreating, DeMille embraced the scandal, letting the outrage fuel ticket sales. Lines wrapped around blocks as whispers spread about the most shocking scenes ever filmed. The protests, ironically, only increased its allure. In the end, The Sign of the Cross became a financial success, but also a cautionary tale. It showed studios that religious organizations could cripple a release, and that Hollywood's days of anything goes were numbered. Yet its blend of spectacle and scandal remains unmatched in cinematic history. Fourth Island of Lost Souls, 1932. Few films in the pre-code era could match the sheer nightmare fuel of Island of Lost Souls. Adapted from H.G. Wells' The Island of Dr. Moreau, Paramount delivered a feverish vision of a tropical paradise twisted into a grotesque laboratory. Charles Laughton's chilling portrayal of Dr. Moreau, a sadistic scientist splicing animals with humans, still unsettles to this day. The plot was shocking enough, but it was the execution that sparked outrage. The infamous House of Pain scenes where Moreau tortures his creations to enforce loyalty made even seasoned horror fans squirm. Religious groups immediately branded the film blasphemous, accusing it of playing God and corrupting the natural order. The American South's church coalitions staged boycotts, while in the UK, Ireland, and several U.S. cities, the movie was outright banned. Civic leaders warned it would unleash depravity, and newspapers ran lurid headlines about its ghastly horrors. Paramount found itself defending the film in court to retain distribution rights, but controversy only deepened its allure in urban markets. Audiences whispered about scenes too sick to show, making the movie feel like contraband. Despite, or perhaps because of, the bans, Island of Lost Souls drew devoted audiences who were fascinated by its themes of power, cruelty, and the limits of morality. It dared to suggest that evil could operate without punishment, a notion that made conservative America deeply uneasy. Today, the film is a cult classic, celebrated for its atmospheric dread and philosophical depth. But in 1932, it was a cinematic crime scene, forcing studios to reckon with how far horror could go before the public pushed back. 5. The Public Enemy, 1931. Before James Cagney became a Hollywood legend, The Public Enemy made him a star and made Warner Brothers a target for moral outrage. It followed the rise of Tom Powers, a Chicago gangster climbing his way to power through brutality and cunning. But unlike earlier crime pictures, there was no sugarcoating. The violence was raw, the psychology disturbingly real. The infamous grapefruit scene, where Cagney smashes a piece of fruit into his girlfriend's face, became an instant cultural flashpoint. Women's organizations called for the movie's removal from theaters, and politicians accused it of glorifying domestic abuse. Local censorship boards in cities like Chicago and Boston demanded heavy cuts, while some theaters refused to show it altogether. What really unnerved critics was the film's refusal to deliver a moral resolution. Powers never truly repents. Instead, his life spirals into a grim, inevitable end. For moral crusaders, this was tantamount to endorsing crime as a viable path. Protests flared in multiple states, with community groups warning that movies like The Public Enemy would rot the soul of American youth. Warner Brothers defended it as a cautionary tale, but the message was lost in the furor. Yet in urban centers, the controversy only boosted ticket sales. Audiences craved its grit, and Cagney's magnetic, unpredictable energy made the role unforgettable. By the end of its run, The Public Enemy had not only broken box office records, but also helped push Hollywood closer to enforcing a moral code, proving that telling the truth about crime could be just as dangerous as committing it. 6. The Bitter Tea of General Yen, 1933. Frank Capra wasn't known for courting controversy, but the bitter tea of General Yen proved he wasn't afraid of it either. Barbara Stanwyck starred as Megan, a missionary in war-torn China who falls under the sway of the enigmatic General Yen, played by Swedish actor Niels Astor in heavy yellow-face makeup. The romance that unfolds was nothing short of taboo for 1933, an interracial love story between a white American woman and a Chinese warlord. In the deeply segregated United States, especially in the South, this was enough to ignite fury. Churches, conservative groups, and even some studio chains refused to show the film. The backlash was swift. Headlines accused Capra of moral provocation, and entire states banned the movie. The controversy overshadowed its artistry, lush cinematography, emotional depth, and daring social commentary. Capra defended it as a human story about compassion beyond prejudice, but moral guardians saw it as an affront to decency. Ironically, in the cities where it played, curiosity drove attendance. Urban audiences, less constrained by small-town conservatism, came in droves to witness the film everyone was talking about. Critics praised its bravery, even as it became a symbol of Hollywood's irresponsibility in the eyes of the censorship lobby. Today, the bitter tea of General Yen is celebrated for its ambition and ahead-of-its-time treatment of race and romance. But in its day, it was proof that crossing cultural boundaries on screen could spark outrage every bit as intense as violence or vice. 7. She Done Him Wrong, 1933. Mae West didn't just star in She Done Him Wrong, she practically seduced the camera into rewriting the rules. Adapted from her racy stage play Diamond Lil, the film introduced audiences to Lady Lou, a saloon singer with a penchant for double entendres and a knack for turning any conversation into something suggestive. West's sly delivery, lines like the now legendary, "Why don't you come up sometime and see me?" made censors nervous and moral guardians furious. Church groups labeled her a national disgrace and staged pickets outside theaters. Women's organizations condemned the movie for promoting loose morals, while some cities, including Boston and Chicago, refused to screen it without cuts. Paramount knew they were walking a tightrope. The studio was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy during the Great Depression, and She Done Him Wrong was a gamble, one that paid off spectacularly. The very protests meant to kill the movie only increased public curiosity. Urban theaters saw lines wrap around the block as people came to witness the quips that polite society warned them about. West's persona, confident, self-assured, and in full control of her bold image, was a seismic shift for Hollywood's portrayal of women. She was no damsel in distress. She was the storm. Her flirtations with Cary Grant's straight-laced character became iconic, and the film's box office success single-handedly rescued Paramount from financial ruin. Yet the uproar didn't fade. She Done Him Wrong became Exhibit A in the push for stricter enforcement of the production code. It showed that even without graphic content, innuendo and implication could be powerful enough to spark boycotts. And it cemented Mae West's reputation as the woman who could scandalize America with just a smile. 8. Call Her Savage, 1932. Clara Bow, the original It Girl of silent cinema, made her defiant stand in Call Her Savage, a pre-code spectacle that seemed to collect every taboo it could find. She played NASA Springer, a wealthy socialite whose reckless behavior sent her ricocheting from one scandal to another. The film was a whirlwind. Barroom brawls, saloon catfights, torrid romances, betrayals, and family secrets. NASA's exploits, including risque relationships and moments of raw, unfiltered emotion, shattered the polite boundaries of Hollywood storytelling. A time when women on screen were expected to be demure or punished for their independence, NASA was unapologetic, bold, and often victorious. Predictably, the backlash was fierce. Church leaders and family groups accused Fox of glamorizing immorality. Some theaters, especially in the South and Midwest, banned it outright. Others were boycotted by local communities. Newspapers ran editorials warning it was a threat to public decency, and moral watchdogs called it proof Hollywood could not regulate itself. But controversy was the best marketing tool. Urban audiences, drawn by whispers of scenes too daring for words, packed theaters in cities where it was allowed to run uncut. Clara Bow's performance crackled with charisma, cementing her legacy even as the arrival of stricter censorship soon forced her career into decline. In the end, Call Her Savage was both a hit and a warning shot. It showed that audiences were more than ready for bold female leads, but also that America's moral arbiters were gearing up for a fight that would soon muzzle Hollywood for for decades. 9 Murders in the Rue Morgue, 1932. Universal Studios, fresh off the success of Dracula and Frankenstein, decided to push horror into uncharted territory with Murders in the Rue Morgue. Based on Edgar Allan Poe's story, it starred Bela Lugosi as Dr. Miracle, a deranged scientist performing grotesque experiments in a grimy Paris underworld. Miracle's obsession? Kidnapping women and injecting them with ape blood in his twisted quest to prove evolutionary theories. Even in the anything-goes world of early 1930 horror, this was a lot. The film blended horror with hints of science fiction and body horror in a way audiences had never seen. The reaction was explosive. Cities in the South and Midwest demanded cuts or refused to screen it entirely. Religious leaders called it repulsive and accused it of undermining the divine order by suggesting humanity's kinship with animals. In the United Kingdom, the film was banned for decades. Critics were equally divided. Some praised its atmospheric dread, while others dismissed it as ghastly sensationalism. The infamous abduction sequences, complete with shadowy glimpses of implied violence, drew particular ire from women's organizations and parents' groups. Yet horror fans sought it out. For them, Murders in the Rue Morgue was proof that cinema could still shock in ways no other medium could. The bans and protests only made it more alluring. Today, it's remembered as one of Universal's most daring gambles, a film that dared to combine science, sin, and terror in a way that left both audiences and censors rattled. 10. Babyface, 1933. If one film lit a fuse under America's moral guardians, it was Babyface. Starring Barbara Stanwyck in a career-defining role, it told the story of Lily Powers, a young woman from a steel town who uses her charm, intelligence, and relentless ambition to climb the audacious corporate ladder, one man at a time. From the moment Lily's father dies, she's advised by a local cobbler, in a scene inspired by Nietzsche's philosophy, to use men to get the things you want. And she does unapologetically, moving floor by floor through a Manhattan office building as she seduces her way upward. In 1933, this was nothing short of dynamite. The original cut was so bold that Warner Brothers was forced to reshoot scenes before release. The Hayes office demanded changes. Lily's manipulation had to be softened, and she needed to be portrayed as more remorseful. Even then, religious groups labeled it a disgrace to womanhood, newspapers warned of moral decay, and entire states threatened bans. What shocked moral crusaders most wasn't the seduction itself. It was Lily's independence. She didn't apologize, didn't crumble, and wasn't punished in the traditional Hollywood way. Audiences, especially women, noticed. In urban theaters, lines wrapped around blocks. Many came to see what all the fuss was about. Others came to admire Lily's fearlessness in a world built to keep her in her place. The scandal surrounding Babyface became a rallying cry for stricter censorship. In fact, it's one of the films most directly responsible for the heavy enforcement of the production code, starting in 1934. Today, the uncut version is celebrated as a feminist milestone. But in 1933, it was viewed as dangerous, even subversive. Stanwyck walked away a legend, and Lily Powers became the pre-code poster child for unapologetic ambition. 11th Employee's Entrance, 1933. If you think cutthroat corporate culture is a modern invention, Employee's Entrance will prove otherwise. Released by Warner Brothers at the height of the Great Depression, it starred Warren William as Kurt Anderson, a ruthless department store manager whose only loyalty is to profit. Anderson manipulates his employees, destroys rivals, and most controversially, exploits women in the workplace. The film doesn't portray this as an isolated villain's evil. Instead, it suggests such abuse is baked into the system itself. That raw honesty was unheard of in 1933, and it sent shockwaves through conservative America. Church groups and women's organizations accused the film of normalizing immorality. The portrayal of a workplace where female employees are pressured into compromising situations was viewed as an attack on American decency. Boycotts erupted in major cities, while local censorship boards demanded cuts. Some theater chains refused to screen it altogether rather than face public backlash. Warner Brothers defended the film as a cautionary tale, but that defense fell flat. Critics called it cynical, dangerous, and an open challenge to the moral order. Yet, in urban markets, employees' entrance found an audience that admired its unflinching realism. Depression-era viewers recognized elements of their own workplaces in Andrea Anderson's cold-blooded maneuvers. The outrage it caused cemented its place in pre-code history, a film that dared to say the system itself was corrupt and that happy endings weren't always possible. It's now remembered as one of the boldest social dramas of the era and a precursor to later films about the dark side of capitalism. 12. The Story of Temple Drake, 1933. If Babyface was scandalous, the story of Temple Drake was incendiary. Adapted from William Faulkner's controversial novel Sanctuary, it told of Temple Drake, a privileged Southern woman drawn into a nightmare of crime, violence, and moral corruption. The plot, involving abduction, assault, and a descent into a criminal underworld, was shocking enough, but its frankness was what pushed it beyond the pale for censors. Paramount executives knew they had a powder keg on their hands, but they pressed forward, perhaps hoping the notoriety would sell tickets. They were right, and disastrously wrong. The film's release was met with a national firestorm. Religious leaders demanded it be pulled from theaters, newspapers accused Hollywood of poisoning youth, and civic groups blacklisted Paramount. Some cities banned it entirely, while others allowed only heavily edited versions to screen. What truly rattled moral crusaders was the ending's refusal to offer clear moral restoration. Temple doesn't get the clean redemption arc expected in Hollywood morality plays. Instead, her trauma and choices leave a lingering discomfort. For many, this felt too close to reality and far too dangerous for public consumption. The backlash was so intense that the story of Temple Drake became one of the prime exhibits for those demanding strict production code enforcement. Paramount's reputation in conservative markets suffered for years afterward. Today, it's viewed as a daring and complex character study, but in 1933, it was a scandal Hollywood could barely contain. 13. Search for Beauty, 1934. If there was ever a pre-code film that waved a red flag at moral watchdogs and shouted, "Come and get me," it was Search for Beauty. Released just months before the production code would be enforced with real teeth, Paramount used it as a last chance to push the boundaries. On paper, the plot seemed harmless. Two Olympic athletes are tricked into fronting a health and fitness magazine. But the movie quickly revealed itself as a thin excuse for parading dozens of scantily clad men and women across the screen in suggestive, body-beautiful contests. What really sent censors into overdrive was Paramount's marketing stunt. The studio held real-life nationwide auditions for the film, inviting locals to show off their physiques for a chance at screen time. This caused outrage in conservative towns, where pastors warned congregations that Hollywood is recruiting indecency in broad daylight. When the film opened, the Catholic Legion of Decency immediately blacklisted it. Women's clubs and family groups issued boycott threats, and some cities flat-out banned it. Exhibitors in conservative markets worried about alienating audiences and refused to book the film altogether. But the controversy proved irresistible in urban centers. Young audiences in New York and Los Angeles flocked to see the spectacle, drawn by posters promising the most beautiful bodies ever filmed. The film's shameless combination of athleticism and voyeurism made it both a commercial success and a cultural scandal. In hindsight, Search for Beauty feels like the pre-code era's final defiant smirk, a playful, provocative send-off before Hollywood's moral handcuffs snapped shut. 14. 3 on a Match, 1932. At first glance, Three on a Match looked like a standard Warner Brothers melodrama. It followed three childhood friends, played by Joan Blondell, Ann Dvorak, and a young Bette Davis, as their lives diverged in wildly different directions. But beneath its brisk pacing lay content that would have censors sharpening their scissors. The film tackled subjects that would soon be virtually forbidden: drug addiction, extramarital affairs, and child endangerment. Dvorak's character spirals from high society into addiction, dragging her child into a dangerous underworld. The descent is portrayed with raw frankness, culminating in a shocking ending that left 1932 audiences reeling. Women's clubs and parent groups didn't just complain, they called for total bans. Several states complied, while others demanded severe edits before the film could be shown. Critics were split. Some admired its realism, while others labeled it poison for public morals. What made the outrage even stronger was the film's refusal to moralize. While some characters face consequences, others simply endure, leaving the impression that vice and crime can coexist with survival. For many, this ambiguity was more troubling than the vices themselves. Ironically, the very protests that tried to bury Three on a Match gave it a second life in major cities. Moviegoers curious about the film they don't want you to see filled theaters in urban markets. Today, it's remembered as one of the sharpest, most daring pre-code dramas. A reminder that even at its most censored, Hollywood couldn't resist telling the stories polite society feared. The pre-code era was short-lived, but its impact still echoes through cinema. These films didn't just push boundaries, they demolished them. Which of these forbidden classics would you dare to watch first? Let us know in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more wild Hollywood history.